What happens when one of the most famous women in the world sits down for what should be a straightforward interview and instead unleashes a tirade so shocking that it ends with her being escorted off set in front of millions of viewers? In just 35 seconds, a single comment would shatter any remaining goodwill and turn a morning show appearance into television infamy. This is the story of how a simple question sparked an explosion that nobody saw coming. The Good Morning America studio buzzed with its usual pre-show energy. Cameras were positioned, lights were adjusted, and the crew moved with practiced efficiency. George Stephanopoulos sat in his familiar chair, reviewing his notes one last time. Across from him, the guest chair sat empty, waiting. This was supposed to be a routine interview, a chance to discuss recent projects, philanthropic work, maybe touch on life away from the spotlight. Standard fare for a morning talk show. Nothing controversial, nothing complicated. But from the moment she walked onto that set, something felt different. She entered with an entourage that seemed excessive for a morning show appearance. Assistants, publicists, handlers, they fussed over her as she settled into the chair, adjusting her outfit, checking her makeup, whispering last-minute instructions. The crew exchanged glances. This was more than they were used to seeing. George remained professional, welcoming, warm. He had interviewed presidents, world leaders, celebrities of every caliber. He knew how to make anyone comfortable. He extended his hand with a genuine smile. "Welcome to Good Morning America. Thank you so much for being here." She took his hand briefly, her grip light, almost dismissive. "Of course." The cameras began rolling. The red lights blinked on. Millions of people across the country settled in with their morning coffee, expecting the usual pleasant conversation. George opened with softballs, easy questions designed to warm up the conversation, let the guests relax, find their rhythm. "Let's start with your recent work. You have been involved in some really interesting projects. What has that experience been like for you?" She shifted in her seat, crossing her legs with deliberate precision. "Well, George, I think what people do not understand is how difficult it is to truly make a difference when you are constantly being scrutinized." It was not exactly an answer to the question, but George nodded encouragingly. "I can imagine that comes with challenges. Can you tell us more about the specific projects you have been focusing on?" "The specific projects?" She repeated, her tone suggesting the question was somehow beneath her. "I think the more important conversation is about why someone in my position even has to explain themselves constantly." George maintained his composure. Years of experience had taught him how to navigate difficult interviews. "I am not asking you to explain yourself. I am just interested in hearing about the work you are passionate about." "Passionate," she said the word, like it tasted bitter. Everyone wants to talk about passion and purpose, but nobody wants to acknowledge the sacrifices I have made. The energy in the studio shifted. Crew members looked at each other. This was not going the way anyone expected. George pressed forward, professional as ever. "What sacrifices are you referring to?" She leaned forward, her voice taking on an edge. "Do you know what it is like to give up everything? Your privacy, your freedom, your peace of mind? To have every single thing you do picked apart by people who have never walked a day in your shoes?" "I think many public figures struggle with that balance," George offered diplomatically. "But you chose this life, did you not? You chose to step into the spotlight." Her eyes flashed. "Chose? You think I chose this?" "Well, yes." "Nobody forced you to pursue fame or marry into one of the most famous families in the world." "That is incredibly dismissive, George." Her voice rose slightly. "You are sitting there in your comfortable chair with your comfortable life, acting like you understand anything about what I have been through." George remained calm. "I am not claiming to understand your specific experience. I am simply pointing out that there were choices made along the way." "Choices?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The choice to be happy? The choice to protect myself? Those are not choices. Those are survival." "Survival seems like a strong word for someone in your position," George said carefully. "My position?" She sat up straighter, her voice getting louder. "What exactly do you think my position is, George?" "I think you are someone who has had extraordinary opportunities and also faced extraordinary challenges. But I also think context matters." "Context?" She practically spat the word. "Here we go. This is exactly what I'm talking about. People like you always want to provide context to diminish what I've experienced." "People like me?" George's expression remained neutral, but there was a firmness in his voice now. "I am not sure what you mean by that." "People who have never had to fight for anything? People who coast on their privilege and then judge those of us who actually stand up for ourselves. The studio had gone completely quiet. Camera operators kept filming, but the atmosphere was electric with tension. George took a breath. I think we should take a step back here. This is not meant to be confrontational. I am asking you genuine questions about your work and your life. Your questions are loaded, George. Every single one of them has an underlying agenda. What agenda would that be? To make me look bad, to paint me as difficult or demanding or entitled. That is what you people do. I am a journalist conducting an interview, George said evenly. I am asking the kinds of questions our viewers want answered. Your viewers, she crossed her arms. Your viewers do not know anything about me except what they read in tabloids. Then this is your opportunity to tell your truth. That is why you are here. My truth? She shook her head. You do not want my truth. You want me to perform. You want me to smile and be grateful and pretend like everything is fine. I want you to have an honest conversation, George replied. But it feels like you came here already angry, already defensive. Maybe because I have every reason to be defensive when dealing with people like you. There it is again. People like me. Can you explain what you mean by that? She stared at him for a long moment. You know exactly what I mean. I really do not. You are part of the establishment, George. You protect your own. You tear down anyone who threatens the status quo. George leaned forward slightly. I have spent my career holding powerful people accountable. Presidents, politicians, business leaders. I do not protect anyone. I ask tough questions. That is my job. Tough questions. She laughed again, that same bitter sound. Is that what you call this? Because it feels like an interrogation. Asking about your work and your choices is not an interrogation. Everything is an interrogation when you are already guilty in their eyes. Who has declared you guilty of anything? George asked. Everyone. The media, the public, your network. All of you decided who I was before I ever had a chance to show you. I think that is unfair, George said calmly. You have had plenty of platforms to share your perspective. Platforms that you people control. Platforms where you edit and manipulate and twist everything I say. We are live right now. Nothing is being edited. You can say whatever you want. Can I? Her voice dripped with sarcasm. Can I really? Or will this be clipped and shared out of context to make me look crazy? You are in complete control of how you present yourself right now, George said. The cameras are rolling. America's watching. So if you have something to say, say it. She stood up abruptly. You know what, George? I do not need this. I do not need to sit here and be talked down to by someone who thinks he is better than me. Please sit down, George said, his voice still professional. Nobody is talking down to you. Yes, you are. You have been since the moment I sat down. This was a setup from the beginning. It absolutely was not. Then why are you attacking me? I have not attacked you once, George said firmly. I have asked you straightforward questions that any guest would be expected to answer. Straightforward. She shook her head. You are unbelievable. George remained seated, composed. If you want to leave, that is your choice. But I think our viewers would appreciate it if you stayed and had an actual conversation instead of making accusations. Accusations? Her voice went up another notch. You want to talk about accusations? Let's talk about how your network has treated me. Let's talk about the hit pieces, the negative coverage, the constant invasion of my privacy. I do not control what other programs do, George said. I am responsible for this interview. And in this interview, I have treated you with nothing but respect. Respect. She looked around at the crew, at the cameras, as if appealing to an invisible audience. This is what they call respect, everyone. Questioning everything I say, dismissing my experiences, acting like I am the problem. Nobody is acting like you are the problem, George said, his patience clearly wearing thin but his professionalism intact. But you are making this very difficult. I am making this difficult? She stepped closer to his desk. How dare you? How dare you sit there and act like the victim when you are the one with all the power here? I am not acting like anything, George replied. I'm trying to conduct an interview. You are the one who is being hostile. Hostile. She repeated the word slowly. That is rich coming from you. What exactly have I done that is hostile? Your tone, your questions, your entire demeanor. You have been condescending from the start. I disagree completely, George said, but I'm sorry if you feel that way. You are sorry if I feel that way? She laughed incredulously. That is not an apology. That is gaslighting. It is not gaslighting to disagree with your interpretation of this conversation. There it is again. My interpretation. Like, my feelings are not valid. Like, my experience of this conversation does not matter. George took a visible breath. Your feelings are valid, but your accusations are not accurate. My accusations. She turned to face the camera directly. America, this is what they do. They invite you on, they attack you, and then they act like you are crazy for defending yourself. Nobody is calling you crazy, George said quietly. You do not have to say the word to imply it. One of the producers stepped forward from off camera, speaking softly. Maybe we should take a quick break. No, she said sharply. No breaks. I want everyone to see this. I want everyone to see how I am being treated. George addressed the camera himself. We are going to take a short commercial break. When we come back, hopefully we can have a more productive conversation. Productive? She scoffed. You mean compliant? You want me to be compliant. I want you to be civil, George said. And for the first time, there was real steel in his voice. Civil. She stepped even closer to his desk. I will show you civil, George. You want civil? Here is civil. You are a puppet, a mouthpiece for a corrupt system. You sit here day after day, pretending to be a journalist, but you are just an actor reading lines. The studio went dead silent. That is out of line, George said quietly. Out of line? She was almost shouting now. You want to see out of line? You have not seen anything yet. I think you need to calm down, George said. Do not tell me to calm down. Do not you dare tell me to calm down. That is what people always say when they want to silence women. Calm down. Be quiet. Stop being emotional. I am not trying to silence you, George said, but you are being inappropriate. Inappropriate. She leaned over his desk. You know what is inappropriate, George? Your entire career. The way you cozy up to politicians. The way you protect the powerful. The way you attack anyone who dares to challenge the narrative. That is absolutely false, George said, his voice rising to match hers. I have built my career on integrity. Integrity, she laughed loudly. You would not know integrity if it hit you in the face. Okay, George stood up. That is enough. Oh, now you are standing up? She gestured dramatically. Now you are showing some backbone? Where was this energy when you needed to ask real questions to real criminals? I am asking you to leave, George said clearly. Excuse me? This interview is over. You are being disrespectful, not just to me, but to this entire production. I am asking you to leave the set. You cannot kick me off, she said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. I absolutely can. This is my show, and you are no longer welcome here. She looked around wildly. You are making a huge mistake. The only mistake was inviting you here in the first place, George said. Security, please escort our guest out. 2 security guards appeared from the wings. They approached carefully, professionally. Do not touch me, she warned them, holding up her hands. Nobody is going to touch you, one of the guards said calmly. But you do need to leave. She looked at George one more time. You will regret this. I sincerely doubt that, George replied. She started to say something else, but thought better of it. Instead, she turned on her heel and walked toward the exit, the security guards following at a respectful distance. Her entourage scrambled to gather her things and hurry after her. The studio remained frozen for several seconds after she disappeared through the doors. George sat back down, straightened his jacket, and looked directly into the camera. His expression was composed, but there was something in his eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or just exhaustion. Well, he said finally, that was unexpected. We are going to take a break. When we come back, we will continue with the rest of today's show. The red light blinked off. The cameras stopped rolling. The crew slowly began moving again, talking in hushed voices, processing what they had just witnessed. George removed his microphone, set it on the desk, and walked off set without saying a word to anyone. In the control room, producers were already on their phones. Legal would need to be contacted. Public relations would need to prepare a statement. The footage would need to be reviewed. But the interview itself was over, finished in spectacular, fiery fashion. A morning show appearance that was supposed to be simple and straightforward had instead become something else entirely. A collision of egos, a breakdown of civility, a moment of television that nobody involved would soon forget. What started as routine had ended in chaos. What should have been easy had become impossible. And all because someone forgot the most basic rule of being a guest. Respect the host, respect the platform, respect the audience. George had tried. He had remained professional, patient, diplomatic. He had given chance after chance for the conversation to reset, to find solid ground. But some guests do not want solid ground. Some guests come looking for a fight. And when that fight went too far, when the line was crossed from difficult to disrespectful, George did what any good host would do. He protected his show, his crew, and his integrity. The aftermath would come later. The statements, the think pieces, the social media firestorm, people would take sides, as they always do. Some would defend her, claim she was treated unfairly, say George was too harsh. Others would applaud his decision, say he showed strength, argue that respect goes both ways. But in that moment, in that studio, after the cameras stopped rolling and the dust began to settle, one thing was perfectly clear. This was an interview that never should have happened. Because from the very first exchange, it was doomed to fail. She had come in defensive, angry, ready for battle. He had tried to conduct a normal interview. Those two things were never going to be compatible. And so it ended the only way it could, with her walking off set, security trailing behind, and a host sitting alone at his desk, wondering how something so simple had gone so spectacularly wrong. George had interviewed countless people over his long career. He had handled difficult personalities, hostile subjects, people with agendas and axes to grind. He knew how to navigate choppy waters, how to redirect, how to maintain control even when a guest tried to derail things. But this was different. This was not just difficult, this was combustible. The thing about live television is that there is nowhere to hide. Every moment, every word, every expression is captured and broadcast to millions. There are no do-overs, no second takes. What happens, happens, and everyone sees it. That is the thrill of it, but also the danger. George understood this better than most. He had been doing this long enough to know that anything could happen when you go live. You prepare as much as you can, you plan for contingencies, but ultimately you are at the mercy of the moment. And this moment had been merciless. From the opening exchanges, it was clear that she had not come to talk about her work or her projects or anything substantive. She had come with grievances, a list of perceived slights and injustices that she was determined to air, regardless of whether George's questions provided an opening for them. Every answer circled back to how she had been wronged, how she had been misunderstood, how the world was against her. George had tried to redirect, tried to find something, anything they could discuss productively. But she was not interested in productivity. She was interested in making a point. And that point, apparently, was that everyone was terrible except her. It is a difficult position to be in as an interviewer. Do you push back and risk escalating? Do you let it go and risk looking weak? Do you end the interview and risk looking intolerant? George had tried the middle path. Remain professional, ask fair questions, give her space to make her case, but also hold the line when she crossed into personal attacks. That line had been crossed multiple times before he finally said enough. When she called him a puppet, that was the moment. That was the point of no return, because at that point, it was not about different perspectives or heated disagreement. It was about basic respect, and she had lost all of hers. The walk-off set was dramatic, sure. The security escort added to the spectacle. But what else could be done? Let her continue to hurl insults? Let her commandeer the show for her own purposes? No good host would allow that. No professional broadcaster would stand for it. So George made the call, the difficult call. The call that would generate headlines and controversy, but also the right call. Because at the end of the day, Good Morning America is a show that millions of people invite into their homes every morning. It is supposed to be informative, yes. Sometimes challenging, yes. But also respectful, civil. A place where conversations happen, not shouting matches. She had turned it into something else. Something ugly and uncomfortable and painful to watch. And George had stopped it. That is leadership. That is professionalism. That is knowing when to draw the line and having the courage to enforce it. The easy thing would have been to just endure it. Let her rant and rave, wait for her to tire herself out, move on to the next segment. Plenty of hosts would have done that, avoided confrontation, kept things moving, dealt with it later. But that is not who George is. He has never been someone who takes the easy path when the right path is available. So he stood up, both literally and figuratively. He said no. He ended it. And in doing so, he reminded everyone watching what standards look like, what boundaries look like, what happens when those boundaries are violated. The interview lasted less than 15 minutes from start to finish. 15 minutes that felt like an eternity to everyone in that studio. 15 minutes that would be replayed and analyzed and debated for much longer. But those 15 minutes told you everything you needed to know about both people involved. One came ready to work, to have a conversation, to treat the audience with respect. The other came ready for war. And when war was declared, there was only one possible outcome. She left. George stayed. The show went on. Because that is what professionals do. They handle the chaos, they make the tough calls, they protect the integrity of what they have built. George Stephanopoulos had built a reputation over decades, a reputation for fairness, for intelligence, for asking the questions that needed to be asked. He was not going to let one volatile guest destroy that in 15 minutes. So when she pushed, he pushed back. When she attacked, he defended. When she went too far, he ended it. Simple as that. The cameras would start rolling again soon. The show would continue. Another guest would sit in that chair. The news would be discussed. The weather would be presented. Life would go on. But that 15 minutes would linger. In the minds of viewers, in the whispers of the crew, in the calculations of every publicist who would now think twice before booking their client on the show. Because everyone learned something that morning. They learned that there are limits, that respect is required, that being famous does not give you license to be cruel. They learned that George Stephanopoulos will not be bullied in his own house. And they learned that sometimes the most dramatic moment is not what someone says, but what someone refuses to tolerate. The red light would blink on again. The show would continue. But the message had been sent loud and clear. Come ready to have a real conversation, or do not come at all.